Gentlemen, welcome back to the garage. As if there are any bad days to be out here working on motorcycles, today is a particularly great one because we have our special guest 2008 Kawasaki Versys here with us. We're going to start our initial round of maintenance items that you would do on any used motorcycle by changing its oil. Whenever you buy a used bike, you should probably always do this unless for some reason you know that the oil has been changed recently. Sellers will often tell you, oh yeah, I changed the oil yesterday, when they clearly didn't. So, for the sake of preventative maintenance, we're going to go ahead and change this. And our first step in the process is to get it up on the stands, so that's what we're going to do now. Before we can use my rear stand here, which is set up to use spools instead of the little lifting pads, we need to get some spools or something into these spool bosses so that we can lift the bike from the rear. Now, ordinarily you would just buy spools and stick them in there, but this not being my bike, I don't happen to have a set of the proper size on hand. So instead what we're going to use is a 10 by 1 1/4 bolt that we just thread into there. We'll thread this far enough in that it engages all the way. And we'll do one on the other side, and that will allow us to lift the back of the bike without having to drive somewhere and buy spools right this second. I should probably have my buddy get spools so that I don't have to keep doing this. Alright, so that's now sticking out the back of there, and we'll say that's good enough. We do one here on the other side. It's interesting, the spools don't look like they stick out this far when they have the actual spool on them. This wasn't a terribly long bolt, it looks pretty short in the hole there. Anyway, this should be good enough to get our bike up on the stand. Safety third. Get our hand condoms on here. Never forget your hand condoms. Keeps the sweat in. Alright. Seriously, when you handle oil, it's best to wear gloves. Sometimes I forget, and I've done this repeatedly on the channel, but when you handle fluids, you should probably wear gloves like these. Alright, here we are on the right side of the bike. We'll go ahead and put our oil pan under here to drain our oil into. And something I want to point out before I drain the oil out is, look how full this is. We were under the impression that the previous owner seemed like a pretty knowledgeable motorcycle guy, but this is a rookie mistake. I'm kind of surprised, actually, that somebody who appears to be that knowledgeable would make that mistake. But if we look here, see how the oil is above the sight glass? It should be right in line with this line here. Now, it's okay to overfill it a little bit. It won't hurt anything, but all the way above the sight glass? Amateur hour, man. Anyway, this is a 17 millimeter, and I had some trouble getting my thick wall impact 17 on there because of the proximity of this exhaust pipe. This one happens to be an aftermarket unit, so I don't know if that's the case on the stock muffler as well. But I'm having to use my thin wall normal 17. We'll just give it a tug and get it loose. Once you get this loose, you want to move it out from under the hole as quick as you can so you don't get the oil on your hands. Like that. This oil actually doesn't look too terrible. I have my doubts that the camera will be able to pick it up, but it's not black. It's gently used oil color. So that's a good sign, even if the level in the crankcase didn't inspire a lot of confidence. So we'll go ahead and let that drain, and I'll go clean my hands off and put the plug down. The bulk of the oil is drained out. We'll move our pan forward here, making sure it's still able to catch the drips coming out of there. Now we need to loosen our filter. Now, these motorcycle filters frequently come with this nice nut welded onto the end, which is actually there so that they can be lock wired in place for track use. But it's also convenient in that it lets us get a tool in there and break them loose. Easy peasy. As opposed to having to stick our hand in there where the hot exhaust pipes are. And inevitably you make a mess. I don't see how you could possibly get this out without spilling the oil on the header there. We're going to want to let our oil filter drain. So I've got my handy dandy little oil filter holdy thing. So we go ahead and unscrew this the rest of the way. Off it comes. We dump the oil out, and we set our filter on here ever so carefully, like that. While we wait for the oil to quit draining out of the engine, we'll go ahead and get our filter ready. So we open it up, take it out of here. We need to remove this cellophane wrapper with a knife. Set that aside. We'll put it back in the box, right side up. We take our oil. What we're going to do is fill this up so that it's already full of oil when we start the engine back up. And that gives our engine a better chance pumping the oil through it. Some of these Kawasaki's have an irritating habit where they won't reprime the oil pump if you drain the oil. So you'll get done changing the oil and you go and start the engine and the oil light stays on because it's not building oil pressure. One of the ways that you can help combat that is by filling this up. These newer Kawasaki's are less prone to it once they started using this type of oil filter, but I think I had that happen with my ZX6R years ago. So we'll go ahead and do this. And it helps the process along. All right, that should be enough. We've got not the oil where it's most of the way up to the threads, and you can see it's filling in this inner part here. We'll also take a little bit of the oil and use it to lube the gasket so it'll seal, won't stick. But we've now got the oil filter filled most of the way up, and that's that much less oil that the pump has to pump before the oil will get to wherever it needs to go in the engine. Before we go back to the bike, one last thing we want to do is replace this old crush washer with a fresh one. This is a copper one. Should be totally fine. Now our plug is ready to go back on the bike. Back at the bike, we've got our filter full of oil. We've got our drain plug with the new washer. So go ahead and put our plug back on here. Turn it till it stops. And then, you know what? And then we torque that to 22 foot-pounds. All right, I have to lie on the floor to do this because my torque wrench only has markings on this side. If you have the clicky type, you don't have to do that. So we tighten to 22 foot-pounds, which is right there. And there we go. Now we're ready for our filter. We're also going to take a moment to wipe off the mating surface for our oil filter, because it is down here where it can get crud on it. Now we're ready to put our new filter on. Because it's full of oil, we want to get it on there and move quick. And I have to do this with one hand. Dang it. No. No! Okay. There. If you got oil on the filter, putting it back on there, you're going to want to wipe it off such as you can, because the next step involves hand tightening it. And you just want to get it on there, hand tighten it tight. Basically just until you can't tighten it anymore with your hand. You don't want to kill it. We also want to wipe the oil that got on our pipes off if we can. This will burn off, and so you don't have to be super anal about it, but do want to wipe it off if you can. And if you really feel the need, give it just a little tighten with your wrench. Do not kill this with the wrench. Like, you don't have to get it that tight. Just hand tight plus like 1/10 of a turn with the wrench is good. With our plug and our filter back on, we're ready to put the oil back in. So we go ahead and we open our cap here. And you can use pliers if this is stuck. And frankly, it's not a terrible idea to do this step first, removing this cap. But I knew I was going to be able to get that off. With a new to you bike, if you haven't already removed it and made sure that you can get that off, start with this step. Anyway, take our funnel and put oil in. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we are going to fill until our oil reaches up to that top line on the sight glass. And according to the stamping on the engine case, it should take about 2 liters. These bottles are actually liter bottles. They're not quarts. So it should take about 2 bottles. And you'll notice the line rising in the sight glass, and then it drops, because the oil is really thick and has to drain down into the engine. So there's one, and here's a second. We pause as we do the second liter and let the oil level settle in the sight glass there, because we don't want to overfill this. More is not necessarily more. Now that it's down below there, we'll continue filling. Alright, we're going to go ahead and put the rest of this liter in there. And it's going to be just a hair over the top line. And that's fine. And we will call that good. Okay, we may notice that with the bike on the rear stand, our oil level looks a little low. That's because we're tilting the engine forward and the oil is kind of sloshing forward inside the crankcase. If the rear wheel were on the ground, this would be just about perfect. And in order to get there, I used 2 full liters. The case says 1.9, so that's in the ballpark. I did let it drain pretty thoroughly. Up here at the dash, we've got our oil filled up. We're ready to start the engine up. So we'll go ahead and switch the ignition on. We notice that our oil light here is on. Now, with the engine not running, that's normal. But we want to make sure that that goes out once we start the engine, which tells us that we did our oil change correctly and we don't need to take any corrective action to get the oil pump working again. So, we're in neutral. Got our rear wheel off the ground, so the bike's not going anywhere. Pull our clutch in, fire in the hole. There it is. Our oil pressure light went out with the engine running. So that means that we did our change correctly. We can go ahead and shut the bike down. Something else to check with the engine running. Make sure you don't have any oil leaks here at the drain plug or at the filter. I thought I saw a drop a second ago, but that may be something else. We've got smoke coming off of the pipes from the oil that we spilled on them earlier. That's nothing to worry about, but we do want to make sure we don't have any oil leaking out of here. We also want to make sure that we can see the oil moving around inside the sight glass. So it should drop, or sometimes it rises because the return is up here. We'll go ahead and shut the engine off now and make sure that the oil drains back into the sight glass. Alright guys, that's all there is to it. Truth be told, I have another video to shoot after this, so I'm not taking the bike down off the stand and riding it, but that's what you should do now. Take it for a ride, make sure your oil pressure light stays off. You're all good. Also, you should make sure to let the old oil filter drain thoroughly before you attempt to dispose of it. That way all the old oil drains out into your drain pan and you can take that to your local recycling facility. My location also has a place that will recycle the filter itself. And if where you live has something like that, you should avail yourself of that too and not throw the filter in the trash. Anyway, we're all done here for now. So if you came here looking for advice on how to work on your bike, I hope this video helped you out. And if not, I hope you were entertained. And regardless, I will see you in the next one.